There are moments in life when everything looks complete from the outside, yet something inside quietly aches. You wake up, work hard, follow routines, meet expectations, and still feel strangely unfinished. It's not pain that screams. It's a silence that lingers. A question without words. This story is about that silence, about the search for purpose when life seems ordinary, predictable, and heavy all at once. About how motivation fades not because we are weak, but because we forget why we began. In a small, unremarkable town there lived a carpenter named Jonah Hale. His hands were strong, his work respected, his life stable. And yet, every night as the lights went out and the world grew quiet, Jonah felt the same unsettling thought return. Is this all there is? This is his journey toward purpose. Jonah Hale lived a life most people would call respectable. Every morning he woke before the sun, not because he had to, but because his body had learned the rhythm of responsibility. The town was still asleep when he brewed his coffee, the steam rising slowly as if even time itself hadn't fully arrived yet. By the time the streets began to stir, Jonah was already at his workshop, unlocking the door with the same steady motion he had repeated for years. Inside, everything had its place. Tools hung neatly on the wall. Wood planks were stacked by size and grain. The smell of sawdust felt familiar, almost comforting. This space was proof of his discipline, proof that he showed up, proof that he was reliable. Jonah believed deeply in work, honest work. He believed that if you committed yourself fully, purpose would naturally follow. That if your hands were busy, your heart would eventually understand why. And for a long time, that belief carried him. People trusted Jonah. They brought him broken chairs, unfinished tables, doors that no longer closed properly. They admired his patience, the way he listened more than he spoke. When a piece was done, it was solid, dependable, built to last, just like the man who made it. But purpose, Jonah was slowly learning, is not the same as usefulness. There were moments, small, quiet moments, when the workshop felt heavier than usual, when the sound of his tools echoed too loudly, when he would pause mid-cut, staring at the grain of the wood as if it might speak back to him. In those moments a question surfaced, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to be felt. Why does this feel incomplete? Jonah didn't talk about it. Not to customers, not to friends. He told himself this was what adulthood looked like: routine, discipline, responsibility. He had done everything right. He stayed consistent. He didn't chase distractions. He didn't quit when things got hard. So why did his chest feel tight at night? After closing the shop, Jonah would walk home through familiar streets. Same houses, same lights, same silence. Dinner was simple. Evenings were quieter. He would sit by the window, watching the world slow down, feeling like he was standing still while something unseen moved past him. Purpose, he thought, must be something you reach eventually. Maybe tomorrow, maybe after the next project, maybe after one more year of doing exactly what he was supposed to do. But deep inside, something restless stirred. Not dissatisfaction. Jonah was grateful. Not ambition. He didn't want more things. It was something harder to name. A feeling that life was asking something of him, and he didn't yet know how to answer. And so the quiet life continued, not broken, not unhappy, just unfinished. Jonah decided that if something felt missing, the answer must be effort. Not reckless effort, not dramatic change, just more discipline, more focus, more hours. He told himself that purpose was built the same way furniture was, piece by piece, patiently, through repetition. If he kept his hands busy long enough, clarity would eventually arrive. So he worked harder. He took on more projects, said yes when his body quietly asked for rest. Custom tables, stair railings, cabinets for new homes rising at the edge of town. His reputation grew. People spoke his name with respect. They admired the way he never rushed, never complained, never delivered anything less than his best. Each finished piece brought a small lift in his chest, a brief sense of motivation, a moment where the question inside him went quiet. This must be it, he thought. This is what purpose feels like. Jonah began measuring his days by productivity. A good day meant visible progress, clean edges, perfect joints, satisfied customers. A bad day was one where nothing tangible was completed. Slowly, without noticing, his sense of worth became tied to output. When the workshop light stayed on late into the night, he felt important, needed. When his hands ached and his back tightened, he called it dedication. He believed strength meant pushing through, even when something inside whispered for balance. There were small victories everywhere. A family thanking him for a table that would hold their future meals. A neighbor telling him his work made their house feel like a home. Jonah smiled, nodded, returned to his tools. Praise felt good, but it faded faster than he expected. At night, when the tools were silent, the emptiness returned. Purpose, he was learning, does not live in applause. Still, Jonah chased the feeling. He filled his calendar, convinced that slowing down would allow doubt to catch up with him. Rest felt dangerous. Silence felt like failure. He told himself he was being disciplined, that this was strength, that this was the journey. But discipline without direction can quietly become escape. There were moments, rare but growing, when Jonah caught himself staring at his reflection in the workshop window. Sawdust on his shirt, lines forming on his face. A man building things for others while slowly losing connection with himself. He shook the thought away. Everyone feels tired, he reasoned. Purpose isn't supposed to feel easy. And yet beneath the effort, a subtle crack formed, a flaw he didn't want to see. He was building beautifully crafted objects, but he wasn't building meaning. The work continued. The praise grew. The days blurred together, and somewhere in the rhythm of success, the foundation of his belief quietly weakened, preparing him for a fall he never saw coming. The collapse did not arrive with noise. There was no dramatic warning, no moment where the sky darkened or the ground shook. It came quietly, like most life-changing moments do, on a day that began exactly like any other. Jonah was working on what he believed would be the most important piece of his career. A large custom commission for a historic building being restored at the center of town. The kind of work that would leave his mark. The kind of project people would remember his name by. He had poured everything into it. Weeks of planning, longer nights, absolute precision. This wasn't just wood to him, it was proof. Proof that his discipline meant something. Proof that his years of effort had a purpose. But wood, like life, has its own truth. A flaw hidden deep inside the grain, something impossible to see from the surface, gave way under pressure. A crucial beam cracked during final installation. Not a small imperfection, a structural failure. The room went silent. Inspectors shook their heads. The commission was withdrawn. Deadlines were missed. Trust, once steady, shifted. It wasn't anger that hurt Jonah most, it was disappointment. Quiet, professional, final. The project was reassigned. Just like that, the thing he had tied his identity to was gone. Jonah returned to his workshop that evening with hands that felt unfamiliar. The space that once felt controlled now felt hollow. Tools sat untouched. The air was heavy. For the first time in years, he didn't know where to begin. He replayed every decision in his mind, every cut, every measurement, every moment he pushed himself instead of pausing. Guilt settled in his chest, not just for the failure, but for how much of himself he had given to something that could disappear in a single moment. The town didn't turn against him. Life didn't stop, but Jonah did. Orders slowed, confidence wavered. He found himself hesitating over tasks he once did effortlessly. Discipline without belief became exhaustion. Motivation, once fueled by productivity, collapsed under the weight of doubt. Who was he without his work, without the praise, without the proof? At night, Jonah sat alone in the quiet, the old question returning, this time sharper. If purpose can break this easily, was it ever real? The collapse wasn't just professional, it was internal. A fracture in the story he had been telling himself for years. That effort alone was enough. That discipline guaranteed meaning. That building things would eventually explain his life. But standing in the wreckage of his certainty, Jonah realized something terrifying. He had confused motion with direction, output with purpose, strength with avoidance. And now, stripped of the thing he leaned on most, he was forced to face what remained. Silence, uncertainty, and a self he barely recognized. This was not the end of his journey, but it was the moment everything he believed about purpose began to fall apart, so something truer could one day take its place. Jonah did not accept the collapse. Not fully, not honestly. Instead, he clung to the past with quiet desperation, as if gripping it tightly enough might rewind time. He returned to old routines, polishing tools that didn't need cleaning, rearranging shelves that were already in order. He reopened his workshop every morning at the same hour, even when there were no orders waiting. He told himself this was discipline, but it was fear wearing a familiar mask. Jonah replayed the failure endlessly. In his mind, there was always one small decision he could change, one moment he could redo. If he had just slowed down, if he had just checked one more time. The past became a place he visited more often than the present. He avoided conversations, avoided stillness, avoided the quiet truth pressing against his chest. Letting go felt like admitting defeat, so he held on to his old identity, to the belief that his worth lived in his productivity. He pushed himself to work on meaningless projects, fixing things that didn't need fixing, saying yes to work that didn't fulfill him, just to feel necessary again. At night, sleep came late. His thoughts were restless. Purpose, once something he chased forward, now lived behind him, trapped in memories of who he used to be. The workshop no longer felt like a place of creation. It felt like a museum of his former self. Every tool reminded him of what he had lost. Every unfinished project whispered accusation. Still, Jonah refused to step away, because stepping away meant facing the truth. That purpose cannot be forced. That identity cannot survive on discipline alone. That holding on can sometimes be the very thing preventing healing. He told himself he was being strong. But strength without honesty becomes self-betrayal. Days blurred into weeks. Motivation faded. The discipline that once empowered him now drained him. He was moving, but not progressing. Working, but not building. Alive, but not present. And deep down, Jonah sensed it. He was not preserving his purpose. He was suffocating it. Yet the fear of emptiness felt greater than the pain of staying stuck. So he held on tighter until the weight of what he refused to release finally began to pull him down. This was the cost of denial. And Jonah was about to reach the place where holding on would hurt more than letting go ever could. The workshop went quiet before Jonah was ready to admit why. At first it was just fewer visitors. Then days passed without a single knock on the door. The light stayed off longer. Dust settled where movement used to be. Jonah still showed up every morning, but there was nothing waiting for him. No deadlines, no expectations, no proof that he was needed. So he sat. Hours passed with his hands resting in his lap, tools untouched. The silence felt heavier than any failure he had known. Without work to distract him, there was nowhere left to hide. This was the lowest point, not because everything was gone, but because nothing was speaking anymore. Jonah stopped keeping track of time. Meals were forgotten. Sleep came in fragments. He found himself staring at unfinished wood, not seeing projects, only questions. The kind that don't demand answers, but patience. Who am I if I am not useful? What remains when effort no longer works? Isolation wrapped itself around him gently, almost kindly. Friends assumed he was busy. The town moved on. Life did not pause to wait for his understanding. And that was the hardest truth of all. One evening, Jonah didn't turn on the workshop lights at all. He sat in the dark, listening to his own breath, realizing how unfamiliar it felt to simply exist without producing something. His identity had been built on doing. Without it, he felt invisible, useless, small. But in that darkness, something else appeared, a stillness he had avoided for years. It wasn't peaceful, not yet. It was raw, uncomfortable, honest. The kind of silence that strips away stories and leaves only what's real. Jonah felt the weight of everything he had ignored. Grief for the life he thought he was supposed to live. Fear of disappointing himself. Exhaustion from carrying expectations that were never questioned. This was the moment before change becomes possible. Not hope, not motivation, just truth. Tears came without warning, not from weakness but from release. From finally admitting that discipline alone had not given his life meaning. That productivity had kept him busy, not fulfilled. That purpose had been mistaken for performance. For the first time, Jonah didn't try to fix the feeling. He let it exist. And in doing so, he made space for healing, for listening, for something new to enter. This was the bottom. And strangely, it was also the beginning. Because when nothing is left to hold on to, you are finally free to discover what truly matters. The encounter did not feel important at first. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind Jonah used to ignore. He had left the workshop early, not out of purpose, but because there was nothing left to pretend to do. The streets were quiet, washed in soft afternoon light, the world moving gently without urgency. Jonah found himself walking toward the edge of town, where an old park sat mostly forgotten. He hadn't planned to go there. His feet simply carried him. Near a bench beneath a large, weathered tree sat an elderly man, feeding crumbs to birds that gathered without fear. Jonah slowed, unsure why, then sat at the far end of the bench. They did not speak at first. The silence between them felt natural, unforced. After a while, the man looked at Jonah and smiled, not with curiosity, but recognition. "You look tired," he said calmly, not accusing, not concerned, just observant. Jonah exhaled, surprised by how deeply the words landed. "I am," he replied. It was the simplest truth he had spoken in weeks. The man nodded. "Most people are, but not for the reasons they think." They sat again in silence. Birds fluttered. Leaves shifted in the breeze. There was no rush to fill the space. Finally, Jonah spoke. "I used to think purpose came from working hard, from building something that lasts." He hesitated. "Now I'm not sure what I believe." The old man scattered another handful of crumbs. "Purpose," he said gently, "is not something you build like furniture." Jonah frowned. "Then what is it?" The man turned to him fully. "Purpose is what remains when you stop proving yourself." The words settled slowly. "You spent your life becoming useful," the man continued, "but you forgot to become present." Jonah felt something shift inside him. Not pain, not relief, but clarity. Simple, undeniable. "You don't lose purpose when you fail," the man added. "You lose it when you refuse to listen to what failure is trying to teach." They sat quietly after that. No advice, no instructions, just space. When Jonah finally stood to leave, he realized something had changed. Not externally. Nothing in his life was fixed. His problems were still waiting. But inside, something loosened. Purpose was no longer something he had to chase. It was something he had to allow. And for the first time in a long while, Jonah felt ready to begin again. Not from effort, but from truth. Rebirth did not arrive with confidence. It arrived quietly, disguised as small choices. Jonah did not wake up suddenly inspired. There was no surge of motivation, no clear plan for the future. What changed was simpler and far more difficult. He stopped running. The next morning, Jonah opened the workshop later than usual. Not out of laziness, but intention. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before turning on the lights, breathing in the familiar scent of wood and dust without the pressure to produce. For the first time, he asked himself a different question. What feels honest today? There were no grand projects waiting, no deadlines, just a piece of old wood resting in the corner, scratched, uneven, overlooked. Jonah picked it up, not to sell, not to impress, but to listen to his hands again. He worked slowly. Every movement was deliberate, every cut mindful. There was no rush to finish. The discipline he once used to escape his feelings now became a way to stay present with them. Some days he barely worked at all. He cleaned, he observed, he allowed silence to exist without filling it. Other days he built small things, stools, shelves, simple repairs. Not because they mattered financially, but because they mattered personally. Healing rarely announces itself. It whispers. Jonah began noticing things he had ignored before, the way light moved across the floor, the sound of the town waking up, the calm that came from doing one thing with full attention. Purpose no longer felt like pressure. It felt like alignment. He apologized where needed. He forgave himself where possible. Discipline returned, not as punishment, but as care. He showed up consistently, even when progress felt invisible. This time he wasn't chasing transformation, he was allowing it. There were moments of doubt, moments when the old voice returned, telling him he was wasting time, falling behind, losing relevance. Jonah acknowledged the voice, but didn't obey it. Strength, he was learning, is not force. It is patience. Like with each small act of honesty, something inside him softened. Purpose began to rebuild itself, not as a destination, but as a relationship with the present moment. Jonah wasn't who he used to be, and he wasn't who he would become yet. But for the first time, that space in between felt peaceful. This was rebirth, not dramatic, not instant, but real. Growth, Jonah soon discovered, does not erase old patterns, it challenges them. Just when the days began to feel lighter, when the workshop felt calm instead of heavy, the familiar restlessness returned, not as despair, but as temptation. The temptation to rush, to measure, to prove. A former client stopped by one afternoon, praising Jonah's past work, hinting at a large project that could restore his reputation overnight. The old feeling stirred instantly, the rush of being needed, the promise of significance through achievement. That night, Jonah barely slept. His mind replayed possibilities, recognition, security, validation. The old definition of purpose, Nakatasan, shaped by results and approval, knocked gently, waiting to be let back in. This was the new struggle. Not failure, but choice. The next morning, Jonah stood in his workshop, hands resting on the table, heart divided. Accepting the offer would not be wrong, but it would pull him back into the same pattern, losing presence in exchange for performance. He breathed deeply. Purpose, he reminded himself, is not urgency. He accepted the work, but on new terms. Slower timelines, honest boundaries, space for rest. When pressure rose, he paused instead of pushing through. When doubt appeared, he didn't obey it. The struggle didn't disappear. But Jonah no longer confused discomfort with danger. Discipline, now rooted in self-respect, carried him through. Each time he chose consistency over compulsion, strength deepened. The work no longer consumed him, it supported him. This was proof of transformation, not perfection, consistency. And in that quiet resistance to his old self, Jonah realized something powerful. Purpose isn't found once, it's practiced daily. The new dawn did not announce itself with sudden joy. It arrived slowly, like morning light slipping through a window you forgot was open. Jonah noticed it one ordinary day while sanding the edge of a small table. His hands moved without tension. His breath was steady. There was no hurry to finish, no voice in his head measuring worth by speed or outcome, just presence. And in that presence, peace. The workshop felt different now. Not quieter, more alive. It held stories again. Not of success or failure, but of attention, of care, of intention. People returned, not because of reputation, but because something about the space felt grounding. Jonah listened more, spoke less, worked with clarity. Purpose had shifted. It was no longer about what he produced. It was about how he lived. Jonah began teaching small workshops, sharing what he knew, not to be admired, but to connect. He helped others find patience in their hands, courage in slowness, meaning in doing one thing well. In giving, his own sense of purpose deepened. The emptiness that once haunted him no longer asked questions. It had been answered through living. Jonah understood now. Fulfillment does not come from reaching a destination. It comes from alignment, when who you are matches how you move through the world. The dawn was not brighter because life became easier. It was brighter because Jonah finally saw clearly. And this is where the story gently turns toward you. Because Jonah's journey was never only about carpentry or failure or a quiet town. It was about purpose, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't chase applause, and doesn't disappear when things fall apart. If you are listening to this and feel tired in a way sleep can't fix, if you've been disciplined, consistent, responsible, and still feel something missing, know this: you are not broken. You are being invited inward. Jonah learned that purpose is not something you prove through constant effort. It is something you uncover when you stop running from yourself. Work can be meaningful, but productivity alone cannot hold your identity. When your worth depends on output, peace will always feel temporary. He learned that failure is not the opposite of purpose. Often, it is the doorway to it. What collapses is usually what was never meant to carry the full weight of who you are. Failure strips away noise so truth can speak. He learned that holding on too tightly to old identities, old definitions of success, old versions of yourself, can quietly suffocate growth. Letting go is not giving up, it is making space. He learned that discipline, when rooted in fear, becomes punishment. But discipline rooted in self-respect becomes healing. True strength is not how much you endure, but how honestly you listen. He learned that purpose is not a destination waiting in the future. It lives in attention, in presence, in how you treat the moment in front of you. It is found in contribution, not comparison. He learned that transformation does not erase old struggles. It teaches you how to meet them differently. Purpose must be chosen again and again, not perfectly, but consistently. And finally, Jonah learned that peace does not come from finally becoming someone else. It comes from returning to yourself without judgment, without urgency, without the need to prove. If you are on your own journey right now, trust this: you don't need to rush. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be more impressive to be more purposeful. Purpose is already closer than you think. It's waiting in the quiet moments, in the honest choices, in the courage to live, aligned, not admired. And maybe, just maybe, this story reached you at the exact moment you needed to hear it. If it did, carry it forward. Share it with someone who might be searching too. And if you'd like more stories like this, stories for healing, strength, and quiet transformation, stay connected. Your journey matters, and it's far from over.